Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the second video in a series where we're building a weather app in Flutter. On the left is where we ended off, and on the right is where we're going to be at the end of this video. So this video is about making beautiful interfaces using Flutter. Be sure to check out the GitHub repository that I'm going to link in the description, as well as in my blog post, where you can find the complete source code as well as all of the icons that we're going to be using in this app. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to be building. So on the top, you can see that we have our location. Below that, we have a card that displays the current weather. On the right, we have the current temperature. Then we have what it feels like. We have a description, an icon, the high and low. Below, we have another card with some more details of the current weather, including wind, humidity, and pressure. Open weather returns a bunch of data, so you can put whatever kind of data you want in here. I just chose these three because I want to know those three. I like them. Below that, we have the hourly forecast, which scrolls horizontally. And then below that, we have the daily forecast for 7 days with data on the left, the icon in the middle, and the high and low on the right. Sweet, let's get started. So something you may notice about this new weather app is that there's additional data, namely the forecast data. To handle this, we're going to have to build some new models. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I talked about it more in depth in my first video. So if you want, go ahead and check that out. But here are all the interfaces that I'm going to be building. And then once again, you can find the complete source code on my GitHub repository. One important thing to note though is that in our forecast.dart, it holds a list of the hourly data as well as a list of the daily data, which in turn are all models. Inside of here, we also pass in JSON, which is then looped through to then create hourly objects, and then loop through again to create daily objects, and then returning an instance of the forecast model. There's a few more things we're going to have to add to this project before we get started. One of those is an extension. So in the root of our project folder, we're going to create a new file. I'm going to call this one extensions.dart. And here we're going to put this code here. We're going to define an extension on the string object, and there's going to be 3 of them in here. In caps, in all caps, and capitalized first of each. What these will do is when I have a string, I can do dot in caps or dot in all caps or dot capitalized first of each, and it will take that string and modify it in a certain way. Dot in all caps is pretty obvious. It takes it and makes everything to uppercase. But the one we're going to be mainly using is capitalized first of each, which is going to capitalize the first letter of each word. Something that we're going to be using on the description of our current weather widget. Sweet, let's save that file. And the next thing we're going to do is add a dependency. In puzzspec.yaml, we're going to add a dependency under our Cupertino icons in here. I went over dependency adding in the last video, so if you need a refresher, go ahead and check that one out. But we're going to be adding the international dependency, which is going to allow us to do some date time conversions, which we will need to display the current date. So we're going to be using version 0.16.1. If by the time you see this video there's a new version, go ahead and use that. But when I hit save, VS Code should automatically, yes, run flutter pub get to install this dependency. Perfect. All right, let's get started in main.dart. Opening it up here, we're going to change a few things. The first thing I'm going to do is actually define the location that we're going to be grabbing the weather from in here. Now I'm going to define this location in the list, but this app doesn't yet have the functionality to pick from a list of locations. It only uses the first one in the list, but I'm going to be laying the groundwork so that if you do in the future want to have the app allow you to pick a location, this is what you're going to be using. All right, here is our list of locations. We have the red underline just because we're missing our model import. There we go. You can see that I'm using Calgary, Canada for my location, and then we also have to specify the latitude and longitude. So feel free to put in whatever you want for here. This is what I'm going to be using. We're also going to change the title of our app from Flutter Demo to something like weather or whatever you want. And then in our current weather page, we're going to also pass in our locations now. And this is going to give you an error because we haven't changed it in the current weather page file yet, but we're going to do that right now. All right, we now need to add the locations to the constructor of the current weather page. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to fast forward to this part of the video and then explain it after. Perfect. So what we did was we added a final variable to the current weather page as well as the current weather page state classes, which then we pass in through the constructor that we have here as well as the constructor that we have here. Inside of the current weather page state, we also have the location variable, which we'll be using to set the location of this page. So if you were to have multiple locations, this is the one you would set each time the user picks the new location. But instead, for our sake, inside of our constructor, we just pick the location at index 0 and assign it. I'm going to create a new build method. So I'm going to take the current one that we have and just replace it with this one here. It's a little smaller, a little simpler, but you can see inside of here we have a scaffold again. We're going to set the background color to a slight off-white to a gray color to make some of our cards stand out a little bit more and look a little bit nicer. Inside of the body we have a list view, which is something that I'm going to be going over a little bit later, but essentially it's just a list of widgets. So the children are the list of widgets, and in here we call 3 different methods, which we're going to be defining in a little bit. This first one will create the first 2 cards, the next one will create the hourly, and the next one will create the daily. So let's start building these methods. So before we get too far in, the first thing we actually got to do is fetch the forecast weather. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to our current weather.dart, and we have a get current weather as a method, but we're going to actually add another one called get forecast. It's nearly identical. We have our URL, our API key, but this time we specify our latitude and longitude. We're also going to pass in a location so that we can grab those latitude and longitude pieces of information, and then we're going to build a forecast and then return it. So we have another squiggly underline just because we're missing the import. There we go. So we have our get forecast method. The next thing we got to do is deal with this asynchronous functionality. I went over using Future Builder in the last video to handle asynchronously loading data in Flutter. So if we go back up to the top here, we have our weather box method, and right on top of that, we're going to add our 3 methods that are listed here. I'm just going to paste them in here, and then we're going to walk through them a little bit. Again, you can get the source code all on the GitHub repository. So we have the first one here, current weather views. This one is going to get the current weather. We're going to pass in our locations as well as the location and our build context, which we'll need. Then once again, we're going to be returning a future builder and detecting if we have snapshot data. If we do have snapshot data, we're going to build a widget inside of a column. If not, we're going to return the progress indicator again. And the future is actually going to be called on get current weather, which is not yet implemented. Same with the create app bar as well as the weather details box, which we're going to implement. Then we have another future builder method for the hourly forecast. We're going to be passing in the location as well as calling the get forecast, which we just defined below, passing in that location. And then if the builder has a snapshot and it has data, then we're going to be returning the hourly boxes widget. That's something that we're going to build later on. Once again, almost exactly the same, very, very similar. We're going to be calling the same get forecast method, and then this time returning our daily forecast boxes, which all in turn get returned back up to this list view here in our build method. So if you need a refresher on Future Builder, check out the first video. But now we're going to be moving on to creating some of these methods that we call. The first card that we're going to be building is the current weather card. So here are the Flutter widgets that we're going to be using. The red boxes is our containers. The green box is a column, and the purple box is a row. So containers allowed us to add positioning attributes like padding and margin to the widgets within. The green box, the column, allows us to stack widgets vertically. So you can see that vertically we got an icon and then 2 text widgets, or on the right we have 2 text widgets stacked vertically. Then the purple box allows us to make a row, which allows us to stack widgets horizontally. So inside of that we have the 2 columns, which are stacked horizontally. So we're going to use the power of these 3 widgets together to build this first box. So back in our code, we're actually going to be replacing the weather box method, which we have below. In here, we got a column with all of our weather data in it, I'm actually going to be deleting all of this here. We're going to keep our return statement because we still have to return a widget, but instead of a column, I'm going to be using a container, just like we had in our diagram. Inside of here, just like I said, we can have positioning attributes. We're going to define a padding attribute as well as a margin attribute. In here, we're also going to define a height attribute, which I'm going to give a value of 160, as well as a decoration. A decoration allows us to do things like box shadow or border radius. You'll see us use this a lot in this video. Then, after this, we're going to define a child. Inside of here, we're going to be building our row because that is the child of this container. I'm going to fill in these padding and margin attributes, both with a constant of 15, as well as giving the decoration a box decoration with a border radius of 20. Let's move on to making this row. So inside of our child in the container, we're going to define the row widget and then give it some children. So if we look back at our diagram, we can see that the children are going to be columns. However, these columns need to be spread out quite a bit. So we're going to be using a widget called the expanded widget. We'll help push the widgets that we want on the right, and the widgets on the left. So I'm going to add this expanded widget as well as a column as its child. Perfect. Now I'm going to add a couple attributes to this column. One of them is cross-axis alignment, and the other one is main axis size. I'm going to use these two widgets to make sure everything is lined up to the left. Perfect. Now we get to define the children of our column. Let's look back at our diagram one more time. Inside of here, we've got two containers, as well as an icon. We're going to skip the icon for now, and then just move on to those two containers. Inside of the containers, we have text widgets. We went over text widgets in the last video. They're pretty self-explanatory. They just display text. So let's add in our two containers, as well as I'm going to add in a margin property to help give them some spacing. And then inside of the text widget, I'm going to add in some text style to help give it some font weight, size, and color. So we got our two containers in here, both with a margin property, as well as a text child. You can see here that we got an error here because a capitalized first of each isn't found. That is the extension that we defined. So we're going to have to go to the top of the file and type import and then extensions.dart. Hit save and our error will go away. Perfect. So let's keep building this widget. Next up, we're going to add the second half of the row. There's in there, looking back at our diagram, a column with two containers. Both containers contain a text widget. Right after our expanded widget is where we're going to insert this code. We have a column with children, which is going to be an array of widgets. In here, we're going to have two containers along with two text widgets. Perfect. All right, we have our two containers here along with our two text widgets. We can see that we got the current temperature and what it feels like in here. Awesome. One small thing, we got a squiggly line down here just because we got to add a semicolon because this is the widget that we are returning. Awesome. Now we have our weather box, but we're still missing our icon, which we're going to put right up here, which I'll add a comment for, add icon, so that we don't forget. So now we're going to be adding some icons. Make sure to check out the GitHub repository because I have all the icons there, all named correctly. OpenWeather will return an icon attribute when you query its API. So I renamed all of my weather icon files to match those names. So make sure to grab those, and I'm going to import them into this project right now. Here are my icons here. We're going to take all these and I'm going to copy them And then inside of the root of our project, I'm going to add a new folder called assets. Oops, not inside of lib, inside of the root. There we go. Where did it go? Here it is. Inside of here, I'm also going to be adding a folder called icons. And then I'm going to reveal it in Finder and then paste in all of these icons. Perfect. We'll just click on one to check it out, make sure it's there. Awesome. So when we want to add local assets to Flutter, we have to change something inside of our pubspec.yaml. We have to tell Flutter where to look. So inside of here, we have actually an example that's commented out right on line 52 here. I'm going to uncomment that, take out that second example, and then we are going to just point Flutter to the directory of our assets. So that is assets / icons. Make sure to end it with a slash so that it knows it's a directory, so that everything inside of that directory Flutter will have access to. Hit save, and perfect. Flutter pub get will run again. We're going to head back to currentweather.dart. So there are a couple methods that we're going to write to get weather icons. One is going to get a regular size icon, and then one is going to get a small size icon. If we look back at our final design here, we have small icons inside of the forecast, as well as a big icon inside of the current weather. You can adjust these sizes if you want, or you can adjust this method to make it a little bit cleaner. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be putting in the bottom of my file two methods to return image widgets, which will get the icons that we want. Here are our two methods. Let's just look at them real quick. First, we have a path variable to assets icons, which is where our icons are. We have an extension .png, which is what all of our images are. Then we return an image asset. Inside of this image asset constructor, it's very simple. All we do is pass the path plus the icon name, which we pass in as a parameter to this method, plus the extension. So for example, it would be something like assets / icons / sunny.png. Then we return the width and height that we want. The only difference between these two methods is the width and height. We have 70 and 70, and then 40 and 40 for the small version. So heading back up to where we want to add an icon, right here, all we're going to do is call that method. So we're going to do get weather icon, and just like that, get weather icon, and then pass in the weather icon that we want. Perfect. Make sure to add a comma because this widget is inside of an array. We'll hit save and remove this to do comment. If you look at our design here, you're going to see in the background a little wave. We draw this in Flutter. It's not an image. To do that, we're going to be using a widget called clip path. Clip path allows us to draw a bunch of different types of shapes and lines. It's a little bit complicated, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time going into it. For shapes, you can use things like draw rect to draw rectangles. You can use add oval to add an oval, or add arc to add an arc. And there's a ton of these other ones for shapes. But for lines, there's some ones called quadratic Bezier 2, as well as cubic 2, as well as a few others. But we're going to be focusing on quadratic Bezier 2. So here is a little GIF showing off quadratic Bezier 2 in action. You can see that there's 3 points, P0, P1, and P2. At the start, there's a line, this green line that goes from P0 to P1, and then the point at P0 moves to P1, the point at P1 moves to P2, as well as this black dot moves along this green line at that same linear rate. So that all combined allows us to draw a curve. It's a little bit complicated to wrap your head around, so go ahead and do some more research if you would like, but we're going to jump into some code. Bottom of currentweather.dart, we're actually going to define a new class. We're going to do the clipper class, which extends the custom clipper. So in here, you can see that we have a path variable. This path variable is essentially a dot that we can use to move around the screen as well as draw lines with. So at the beginning, we set it to move to point 0 and size.height -20. Position 0, 0 is in the very top left of the screen. So position 0 with size height minus 20 is actually very close to the bottom left of the screen. This is where we're going to start the drawing of the wave. Then we call quadratic Bezier 2 3 times to draw 3 curves, and then we draw 2 more lines to finish it off, and then draw a line back to the bottom left corner, and then close off the path. This in turn should make a shape very similar to this here. So let's just take a look at one of these quadratic Bezier 2 calls to try and get a better sense of it. In here, we have 4 parameters. You can see that there's x1, y1, x2, and then y2. These are 2 of the 3 points. Now, if you remember back at that GIF, we had 3 points, P0, 1, and 2. But in here, we're only passing 2 points as parameters. That's because P0 is wherever the path is already at. So that's why we need to position it before we draw this curve. So we position it to 0 and then height minus 20. That's point 0. Point 2 is then width over 6 times 1 and size height over 2 plus 15. Then our point 3 is the width over 3 and then the size height minus 30. Take a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around this and try to imagine this quadratic Bezier 2 curve animating in action. Once you do, you can probably get the hang of it and then imagine what this would look like when we run our code. Going back up to weather box method, instead of returning container, we're going to be returning a stack widget. A stack widget allows us to stack things on top of each other in the Z index so that we can have the background color, and then we can have our clip path, and then on top of there we can have this container where we display all of our data. So I'm going to move the container down a bit and add in a stack widget. In here, we pass it children as an array. These children, which are the children we stack on top of each other. So inside of here, we're going to be adding a container, which will be our background color. On top of that, we're going to be adding our clip path, and then on top of that, we're going to be adding our container, which holds all of our weather data. Here's our container. It has the exact same padding and margin, height, and box decoration properties as the container that we defined down here. This is because all it is going to be the indigo accent background that you see. You can change this color to something else, but I like indigo accent. I think it looks really nice. The second one that we're going to be using inside of this stack is the clip path. To do that, we're going to be defining our clip path as such. You can see that we have a clipper property, which we initialize a new clipper, and then inside of here, we give it the same padding, margin, and dimensions, and then we give it a slightly different background color. This clipper is the one that we defined at the bottom. This clipper method right here. Perfect. So with this, we're now going to add a container at the very bottom. Also, I forgot a semicolon right there. So let's take our container that we defined with all of our data in it. I'm going to cut it, remove that semicolon, and append it into this array. Perfect. There we go. That is our weather box all done. Now, this widget is huge. Never mind, the file itself is massive, and it's only going to keep growing. In Flutter, it's best if we take these widgets and separate them out. We did that with our Clipper class here, but the point of this video is to show you how to use images and translate that into Flutter widgets. So for the sake of that, I'm not going to be taking any of these out and making them their own widgets in their own files. It's all just going to be in one file. So that's okay in weather card. Taking a look at it, we have the wind, humidity, and pressure. Let's try to break this down. So this diagram here, again, can outline some of the widgets that we're going to use. The one on the outside, that red box, is a container. Again, that allows us to add padding and margin. The green boxes are columns, which allow us to stack widgets vertically. So we have two text widgets inside of each stacked vertically, and then the purple box is a row once again, which allows us to stack widgets horizontally. So using these three widgets, let's look at some code. Underneath our weather box widget method, I'm going to define a new method. It's going to be returning a widget, and we're going to call it weather details box. Inside of here, we're going to be passing weather instance as a parameter. Perfect. Inside of here, we have to return a container because that is the first one on our diagram, just like this. So again, we have padding and margin, and then another box decoration. We're going to give it the background color of white, give it a nice border radius, as well as some box shadow. So don't forget to add your semicolon there because this is the widget we're returning. And now let's add the child. The child is going to be a row with an array of children once again. So for the children of this row, we're going to be using the expanded widget once again. And inside of there, we're going to be adding a column with two containers, which each have a text widget inside. Perfect, just like that. So here's our column with our children, each with a container with a text widget. Here we have wind as a title, and then we're grabbing weather.wind as the text widget underneath that one. Now we just gotta add our other columns below. Perfect, just like that. You can copy paste that first expanded widget to get the other two, and then just change your title text and what you're grabbing from weather. Make sure to use .toInt everywhere that you're using a number. This will round it and make it look a little bit nicer. If you want, you can leave it. Open weather will give you 2 decimals of accuracy, but I like to use .toInt to make it look a little bit nicer. Perfect. That is our weather details box. It is a very simple widget, but it looks really, really nice. To doing our hourly and daily forecast, we're going to have to add a couple methods at the bottom of our file. These ones here. These ones allow us to do date timestamp conversion because open weather will not give us a pretty looking date, it will give us a timestamp. We have to convert it ourselves and display that to the user. So this first method will get the time in a format of hours to the 1 digit, and then minutes, and then the AM or PM. This next one will just turn capital E, which is a shortened day of the week. So for example, for Tuesday, it would return TUE. These are pretty simple methods. We pass in a timestamp as an integer, and then returns a string of the formatted date. All right, let's build this hourly forecast box. So looking at a diagram, this is what it's going to look like. We kind of have a list of widgets which scrolls horizontally. Taking a look at what widgets we might use, we can see that we have a container to encapsulate it all. Inside there, we have a blue box, which is a list view. This creates a scrollable list of widgets. We can define a list view to scroll horizontally or vertically. But inside of there, we pass an array of children, which is then scrollable. Inside of there, we have containers for each item in the list view. And then inside of there, we have a column to help format our text widget, image, and then other text widget. Awesome. Let's look at some code. To build our hourly forecast box, we're going to have to define a new method. I'm going to put it right here under this last one we built. It's going to return a widget, and I'm going to be calling it hourly boxes. It's going to take a forecast as a parameter, which I'm going to call forecast. Perfect. Inside of here, we're going to return a container as the first widget. Great. We have set a margin again, as well as height. Inside of here, our child is going to be a list view. You can see here that we have list view.builder. In Flutter, there's a couple different types of list views. List view builder allows us to dynamically build a list view based on an array of objects. So we have padding, which you're used to, scroll direction, which we want as horizontal, and then item count. So we have our forecast, and then we get our array, or our list, sorry, of hourly objects. So the item count is that dot length. And then Flutter will loop through every single one of these hourly objects and then build whatever we put in here. So we're building a container. Right now there's nothing in here, but we're going to build our widget. So for every single hourly object in that list, it will build this container. So let's put some stuff in this container. Perfect. All right, this container is a little bit bigger now, but we got some stuff in here. We got some padding in here. We have a margin, again, a box decoration, which we see many times, giving it a background color of white, border radius, as well as box shadow. And then inside of this container, we have a child of the column and our two text widgets, as well as we use our getWeatherIcon method to get the weather icon. Now, keep in mind, whenever we reference our data, we have to do forecast.hourly like we normally would, but then we have to get the index, which is defined up here inside of this item builder method. This will help us get the correct hourly object from the array, and then we can grab the property, so .temperature or .icon or .datetime. Here we call our getDateTime or getTime from timestamp here to give us the time of day instead of a date stamp, and we pass the date stamp in as a parameter, and then it will build a really awesome list view. So let's move on to building our daily forecast section. So let's look at a widget breakdown. And here we have a list view. Inside of there we have a bunch of containers, and inside of the containers we have a row. This row helps us space out those three elements we got inside: the text widget, image widget, and then the text widget. Let's look at some code. Let's add this method definition right under our hourly boxes method. I'm going to call it daily boxes with forecast as our parameter again. And then the first thing we're going to be returning is a expanded list view. Perfect. Is our list view. Again, we're using list view builder. This property here, shrink wrap true, is very important because technically we're embedding this list view inside of another list view. So we have to use this property in order for Flutter to interact with it properly. Then we have this clamping scroll physics. It helps to do the same thing. Padding again, item count, and then the same item builder where we're returning a container, again with some padding, margin, and then inside of the container we have a child, which is our row, and inside the row we have three expanded widgets again. First one is text, then we have an icon small, and then we have a text again. All right, last but not least, we have to build this app bar-like thing, which displays our location. So this is what it should look like. But let's try to figure out what widgets we would use to build it. So we have the outside of a container, and then inside we have a row. That's because on the left we have a text widget, and on the right we have a Flutter icon. So let's look at some code. I'm going to add a method called createAppBar right underneath our daily boxes widget. It's going to return a widget, and then as a parameter, it's going to take our location. Perfect. So our outer box was a container, so I'm going to return a container with a child. Perfect. Let's add some attributes to this container. Great. We have some padding, margin, as well as decoration again, box shadow, border radius, and background color. Don't forget your semicolon here. And then our child is a row. Let's add some children to this. So the first child that we have is actually a text widget, but we're using the .rich property. This allows us to insert multiple text spans, which allow us to have multiple text styles. If we look back at what we're building, you can see that Calgary is in bold and Canada is not bold. So here we have a text span for Calgary, which we give it font weight bold, and then we have a second text span which we do font weight normal. Awesome. After that, in our row, we have an icon. This is a new widget. A Flutter icon is very easy to use. You just use the icon widget and specify what icon you want. We're going to be using keyboard arrow down rounded, which you can see a preview of here. And then we have the color black, the size, and then semantic label, which is just for accessibility and won't show up on the app. But I see a couple errors in our code. So let's go back up to the top and check these out. So it looks like we're passing some additional parameters to this app bar, which we don't need. Here's the thing, if you decide to take this app a little further and decide to add in switching location, you will need those actual parameters in there. We have an error here, too many positional arguments. Get current weather currently takes no parameters, but we needed to take actually the location parameter. And then instead of hard coding Calgary in here, we're going to be taking out that and putting location.city. Perfect. All right, looks like we have no errors. And now let's see what happens when we run our code. Perfect, here we go. This is our completed weather app. We can scroll up and down, get our 7-day forecast, and scroll left and right on here and get our hourly forecast. Just like that. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this, guys. I hope you learned something, and I will see you guys in the next video.